Well, the big thing that the provincial government has done is created what's called a step code. And we're around step two, leaning into step three. And really, that's about safety and being energy conscious to build your buildings, to build your houses in that fashion. We at the Hall have created an affordable housing committee that's been ongoing for the past few years, and that consists of obviously city staff, but builders and developers to try to get ahead of the curve so they know what's coming. We also have a city staffer that sits in a provincial committee as an advisor. Sure, the province can put these big ideas out there and try to work with them, but the guys on ground zero are the ones that are actually working with these codes. So it's interesting to see the tie-in with that. People talk about, well, what can we do? Well, a good example is a heat pump, of course. Opposed to your conventional furnace type of a actual heating system, and there's all kinds of grants that are attached to that as well. So for me, it's just staying ahead of the game.
It's a great question. I'm living that experience right now. I'm currently in the process of designing a net positive passive house, and it's going to exceed the requirements of a step 5 residential structure in line with the 9-step process that the BC government established in 2015. When we talk about the implications with the building code in this 9-step process, the BC Liberal government was very specific in its requirement to exclude the BC building code from these requirements, knowing full well that in 2015, by the completion date of 2032, there were going to be numerous advances in the technologies and how we get to net zero construction. And I haven't had any difficulties with that in my process. I've had numerous options to review, and I've chosen an option. It's all Canadian. It's manufactured in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and it's very cost competitive. In fact, I will be able to have my structure at the lockup stage in 3 days, rather than the 2 months that it would take to stick frame this particular structure. So I don't really see it as a challenge or difficulty. It's just a new way of thinking about how we build going forward.
I think the building code's there to make sure we have quality buildings constructed in our province for energy efficiency and for safety. So I think there's a lot of good things there, but where possible, I'd like to see the city making sure that we're getting out of the way of good developments in the city. I think in particular, one area that I'm concerned about is purpose-built rentals. So I'd like to make sure that we can do things to possibly improve the economics of purpose-built rentals so we can get more rental stock in our city. I know that's a problem. I know I've received feedback from the community already as part of my run for council with feedback on that. And so I'd like to make sure we're doing what we can to make the economics better, to attract those businesses and help them compete. It's a big market. People are building condos, they're building purpose-built rentals, making sure we can get good buildings built in Chilliwack.
There's a survey that's done annually in the Lower Mainland, and what it does is compares all the building permit times across the space we live in the Lower Mainland. And consistently, year after year, Chilliwack always places in the top 3. So we are very expedient and we are quick with the building permit process. But that doesn't mean we should take our eye off the ball, because things are changing and there's change on the horizon. As we move to more energy efficient houses and buildings in the province, and I expect the government this year will come up with an announcement exactly that. The residential houses will now move to what's called step 3. And I envision in the coming years it'll go to step 4. And what that will mean for building permits is it changes the scope of the inspection. It goes from something that's more prescriptive, where they're measuring walls and looking at footings. They're still important, but what they'll be doing is measuring the performance of the energy in the house. And that's going to take a lot more time. So What we have to do as a city is to watch this develop, be prepared for it, not be surprised by it, and make sure we have the properly trained and experienced building inspectors working for the city that can carry on these inspections. And let's stay in the top 2 or 3 in the Lower Mainland for these times. It's very attractive to business. In my own personal experience, I've talked to businesses and developers that have come to Chilliwack, and when I ask them what made Chilliwack attractive, one of the things they say is the speed at which the city processes building permits. So I think we're in a good space, but let's not take it for granted and keep watching.
Well, while I have a lot to learn in this area, and I'm certainly open to input from the business community, one thing that I know as a successful business owner is that in order to keep up with demand, you have to have well-trained and adequate staff. So I think it's really important that we're well equipped at City Hall to keep up with the demand of applications to ensure efficient turnaround. I also think it's really important that we access our provincial leaders that live right here in our municipality to ensure that our voices are leveled up and raised up to a provincial level. They need to hear our concerns, and those are the appropriate people to carry those concerns forward.
Yeah, so the last updated plan was 2018, and it looks like later this year that the province is going to require local governments to adopt the STEP code, or Step 3 of the STEP code, which in essence means that the building envelopes need to be 20% more efficient for residential construction, as well as heating would be primarily through a heat pump. So there's work to be done, but we will, as we always do, we will pivot as needed. The key is to get permitting and out as soon as possible so housing starts can get out of the ground as soon as possible, and we've done a really good job at that. In the Lower Mainland, we have the quickest turnaround time for building permits, and people recognize that.
So the BC Building Code right now is a prescriptive method of building where it says like you got to do this in order to achieve these goals, but it's moving to a performance-based system, and a performance-based system is a lot harder for building inspectors to do their reviews and their inspections. And so I think what we need to do is we need to hire more staff so that we keep our turnaround times about 5 weeks or less. In 2020, we had the perfect storm where we had some other cities headhunt some of our staff, and we had some staff go down with COVID. Suddenly our 5 weeks was down to about 3 months for permit time. So we got all our local builders together in a room, and we said to them, look, this is what we can do. We can either keep the status quo, or we can increase the fees and hire 3 more staff and get our permit times down. Overwhelmingly, our local builders said, hire the extra staff, increase our fees, but they know that time is money and we need to get these permit times down faster. After a year of hiring 3 more staff, our permit times went down from 3 months to 5 weeks. So hiring staff is pretty much the only way we're gonna do that to keep our permit times the fastest in the Lower Mainland.
Chilliwack does a fantastic job processing all of the applications for redevelopment and variances and rezoning because it's growing by leaps and bounds. And I know from firsthand experience that Chilliwack has a reputation in the whole valley of being efficient, a good place to do business, and processing things very efficiently. But I would make sure that that would continue and improve. In fact, a project I'm working on right now, which is redeveloping the United Church downtown into affordable housing, is taking longer than we thought. And I really wonder what are the delays. So I share concerns of other developers about what are those delays. I'd love to see that be even more efficient, even more streamlined, and even better communicated.
So as the BC Building Code is a provincial regulation, we unfortunately have no other option but to follow it regardless of whether we think it's over the top or not. I believe that we do need minimum standards in the construction industry, but whether the code goes too far, I can't say as I'm not a builder. What we can do at City Hall is to keep turnaround time on permits as short as possible by retaining staff that have a good working knowledge of the code and can ensure that applications are completed correctly the first time around to avoid delays. No different than any other institution, customer service must be #1 with the city.
The building code is very complex, but here in Chilliwack, they are the authority having jurisdiction. City Hall has the final call, and they have a program in place for our commercial buildings and industrial. The projects themselves have to be managed by the developer with a consultant group. i.e. engineers, electrical engineers, mechanical, and architects. They are the group that signs off on all these buildings at the end. The city takes care of the fire and safety, and we move along. But we have to make sure our infrastructure as a city is good underneath these buildings and around them. Well, the developers are telling me firsthand that they spend thousands of dollars on fees from architects and engineers, which ultimately take the responsibility for this. So if we can come up with a better plan in City Hall or adjust the one we have now, the commercial side should be able to speed up and be a lot more efficient. But given the 2 years of COVID and other delays with staffing, I'm sure within the next year, this will be brought back under control no matter who's running City Hall.
Well, I mean, it's important to know your role as a city councillor. Of course, the city of Chilliwack doesn't write the BC Building Code. That's the province of British Columbia. But what we do have the opportunity to do is to advocate on behalf of our builders, on behalf of developers, on behalf of our citizens when the code becomes too onerous. And I understand the reasons behind some of the changes in the BC Building Code. We want to build homes that are more sustainable. We want to build homes that are more environmentally friendly. But the trade-off is that we want to make sure that building those homes doesn't exacerbate the affordable housing crunch that we already have in our city. It also creates some unintended consequences when we're trying as a city to hire registered professionals and qualified professionals like building inspectors. And if building inspectors aren't qualified up to the most recent changes in the code, then we're creating unnecessary delays across the board. So it's looking at the unintended consequences, looking at the fact that the BC Building Code is kind of a broad one-size-fits-all solution, and it's looking at how do we get to the place where we want to be, which is to build sustainable, environmentally friendly homes, but look at what the consequences are when we're moving either too quickly by adopting step codes or too slow where we're not adopting, good building practices that are going to keep people safe and environmentally friendly in their houses.
In addition to the multiple changes to the BC Building Code, housing affordability has also been impacted by the increase in lumber prices, the workforce shortages for skilled workers, as well as the ever-changing building technologies. As City Councillor, I continue to support the goals of the City of Chilliwack, which is to help address some of these residential building challenges. We can work together to promote provincial grants for homeowners as well as subsidized training programs for skilled workers. And with these programs and with these training programs, our partnerships with the federal and provincial government are imperative. I recently announced with the federal government, Community Futures will be offering training programs for upskilling workers and owners. These opportunities will support quality jobs, which increases the opportunity to provide better building construction and bring more affordable housing opportunities to Chilliwack.
Well, I'm not going to pretend that I know the newest BC building code. I did have experience as a business owner on Mill Street once when I was trying to change services and trying to do some renos in my brick and mortar. It was difficult, and there's a lot of ways that we can tackle it. We can ask businesses and developers, where's the bottleneck? Is it on our side or is it just the code? And if it's the code, is there education needed? Do we need to educate developers and business owners on the easiest way to jump through those hoops, as it were? Or is it a bottleneck on our side as far as online permitting applications and our staffing? So asking businesses and developers where the bottlenecks are and addressing them directly, if it's on our side, is probably the best way to start.